Ranch life and giant pumpkins. The dust devils danced a merry jig across the cracked earth as the truck rumbled to a halt. Billy hopped out, boots crunching on the gravel. The air smelled like sunshine and something earthy, something wild. It was a far cry from the manicured lawns and recycled air of suburban Pleasantville. This was his ranch. Or at least his mom's and dad's, but he felt like he owned every sun-baked acre of it. He shaded his eyes, taking in the sprawling landscape. Faded green hills rolled towards a hazy horizon dotted with scrub brush and the occasional lonely-looking tree. A weathered barn stood sentinel in the distance, its red paint peeling like sunburned skin. He could almost taste the adventure bubbling in his throat. "All right, sport," his dad boomed, clapping him on the back. "Go explore. Just don't wander off too far. And watch out for rattlesnakes." Rattlesnakes? Billy gulped. He'd take his chances. He was a level 4 paladin. He could handle a few pixelated reptiles. Real ones, though, that was a different story. He set off, his initial bravado slightly diminished. The ranch was bigger than he'd imagined, an endless expanse of potential and, admittedly, a little bit of fear. He followed a worn path, his sneakers kicking up puffs of red dust. The silence was deafening, broken only by the chirping of unseen birds and the distant drone of a tractor. Rounding a bend, he stopped dead in his tracks. Before him lay a sight that made his jaw drop. A pumpkin patch. But not just any pumpkin patch. These were behemoths, orange leviathans basking in the afternoon sun. They were bigger than his dad's truck, bigger than his bedroom, bigger than, well, almost anything. He ran towards them, a grin splitting his face. He'd seen pictures, of course, but nothing could have prepared him for the sheer scale of these giants. He reached out and touched one, its skin rough and warm beneath his fingertips. It felt alive. "These are yours, Billy," his mom said, appearing beside him, her face radiant. "Your Grandpa Johnson always said you had a green thumb. He left them for you." His Grandpa Johnson? The man he barely remembered? He'd left him these magnificent pumpkins? He felt a surge of pride, a connection to a past he'd never known. He spent the rest of the afternoon exploring the pumpkin patch, marveling at the sheer size and potential of his newfound inheritance. He imagined winning contests, carving them into fantastical creatures, maybe even hollowing one out and turning it into a giant jack-o'-lantern big enough for him and his friends to hang out in. As dusk began to paint the sky in hues of orange and purple, he retreated to his room, a surprisingly spacious bedroom in the ranch house, complete with its own window overlooking the pumpkin patch. He powered up his gaming rig, the familiar hum a comforting sound in the unfamiliar silence. He logged onto his favorite online game, Realm of Warriors, and was immediately greeted by a barrage of messages from his guildmates. "Yo, Billy. Where you been, man? We need you for the raid. Dude, you missed the epic loot drop. Is Billy even alive?" He typed back, a mischievous grin spreading across his face. "Sorry, guys, been busy. Just inherited a ranch." Silence. Then a flood of responses. "A ranch? Seriously? What, like a virtual ranch in Second Life? Pics or it didn't happen?" He chuckled. He knew exactly what to do. He grabbed his phone and snapped a picture of himself standing next to one of the giant pumpkins, its massive form dwarfing him. He uploaded it to the guild chat. The response was immediate and deafening. "Holy mother of dragons. Is that a pumpkin or a small moon? No way. That's gotta be photoshopped." Billy typed back, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "Nope, totally real. And there are like a dozen more even bigger. I'm gonna be rich." "Rich? What are you gonna do? Sell him to a pumpkin pie factory?" "Nah, man," Billy typed, his imagination running wild. "I'm thinking world record. Giant pumpkin festival. Maybe even a pumpkin-powered spaceship." He could almost hear the collective eye roll of his guildmates. But he didn't care. He had a ranch, giant pumpkins, and a whole new world of possibilities stretching out before him. And he was just getting started. "You guys just wait," he typed, a smug grin on his face. "You haven't seen anything yet." He paused, a sudden thought striking him. "Hey, maybe I can get you guys out here for the pumpkin festival? We could have a LAN party in a giant pumpkin. It'll be epic." The responses were a mixture of skepticism and reluctant curiosity. He knew he had them hooked. Ranch life and giant pumpkins. It was a winning combination. He just needed to figure out how to keep the rattlesnakes and any grumpy neighbors away from his prized produce. The arrival of Krabby Crabtree. The sun beat down on Billy's back as he surveyed his pumpkin patch, a wide grin plastered across his face. They were growing marvelously, plump orange globes swelling larger each day. He'd even managed to coax a few behemoths into existence, destined for blue ribbons at the county fair. Gonna be a record-breaking year, he muttered to himself, patting the largest pumpkin affectionately. He was just adjusting a vine, humming a jaunty tune, when he saw her. A figure, small and rigid, was marching towards him from the edge of his property, a cloud of dust puffing up around her sensible shoes. It was Agnes Crabtree. Billy's grin faltered. He knew Agnes. Everyone in Harmony Glade knew Agnes. She was the self-appointed guardian of all things proper, the enforcer of every obscure HOA regulation ever written. He straightened up, forcing a smile. "Mornin', Agnes. Lovely day, isn't it?" Agnes stopped a few feet away, her face a mask of disapproval. She clutched a clipboard to her chest like a shield. "Johnson," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut through the morning air. "I'm here to conduct a routine inspection." "Inspection?" Billy echoed, his smile now strained. "Of what, exactly?" He glanced at his prize-winning pumpkins, a sudden wave of protectiveness washing over him. "Of your agricultural activities," Agnes stated, her nose wrinkling slightly as she surveyed the patch. "The Homeowners Association has received several complaints regarding potential violations of Section 3, Subsection B, Paragraph 7 of the Community Guidelines." Billy blinked. He was pretty sure the Community Guidelines didn't even have a Section 3. "Complaints? About my pumpkins? What complaints?" Agnes adjusted her spectacles, peering at the clipboard. "Excessive foliage, potential for attracting vermin, unsightliness, the list goes on. I need to assess the situation firsthand." She took a step forward, her sensible shoes crunching on the dry earth. "Whoa there, Agnes," Billy said, holding up a hand. "This is private property. And these agricultural activities, as you call them, are perfectly harmless. They're pumpkins. Growing pumpkins." "That may be so, Mr. Johnson, but the HOA bylaws clearly state—" "The bylaws don't say a thing about pumpkins," Billy interrupted, his voice rising slightly. "And even if they did, this is my land. I pay my taxes. I keep things tidy. What's the problem?" He gestured to his neatly tilled rows, the vibrant green vines, the perfectly formed pumpkins basking in the sun. Agnes' lips thinned. "The problem, Mr. Johnson, is that this display is potentially detracting from the overall aesthetic of the community. We have standards to uphold. And I, as a concerned member of this association, intend to ensure those standards are met." She puffed out her chest, her eyes glinting behind her spectacles. Billy folded his arms. "With all due respect, Agnes, I think you're overstepping. These pumpkins aren't hurting anyone. In fact, they're bringing a lot of joy to the neighborhood. Kids love them. I even let Mrs. Henderson's grandkids come pick out their Halloween pumpkins every year." Agnes waved a dismissive hand. "Sentimentality has no place in maintaining property values, Mr. Johnson. I insist on inspecting your crop." She tried to push past him, her clipboard raised like a weapon. Billy stood his ground. "I'm afraid I can't allow that, Agnes. This is my property, and I haven't given you permission to enter. If you have any legitimate concerns, put them in writing and send them to me. Otherwise, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Agnes glared at him, her face flushed. "You can't just disregard the HOA regulations, Mr. Johnson. There will be consequences." "We'll see about that, Agnes," Billy said, his voice firm. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have pumpkins to tend to." He turned his back on her and bent down to adjust another vine, ignoring her sputtering protests. He could feel her eyes boring into his back, but he refused to acknowledge her. He just kept humming his jaunty tune, louder this time, hoping to drown out the rising tide of his annoyance. He knew this wasn't the end of it. Not by a long shot. A hollow threat. Agnes Crabtree resembled nothing so much as a brightly clad, disgruntled gnome liberated from a particularly fussy garden. Her flowered frock, stretched taut across her frame, seemed to vibrate with the force of her displeasure as she surveyed Billy's burgeoning pumpkin patch. "This," she declared, her voice a reedy, high-pitched complaint, "is simply intolerable." Billy, meticulously positioning a miniature scarecrow beside a particularly rotund Jack Little, straightened, his grin expansive. "Mornin', Mrs. Crabtree. Admiring the bounty, are we? Shaping up to be a whopper of a year, I'd say." A deflating whoosh escaped Agnes Crabtree, akin to a slow leak from a bicycle tire. "Admiring? Preposterous. I am utterly aghast. This eyesore is a flagrant breach of HOA covenants." Billy chuckled, raking a hand through his already tousled hair. "HOA covenants? Last I knew, my spread wasn't exactly part of Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association. We're talking acreage here, not pristine lawns and cookie-cutter mail slots. Don't you sass me, William Johnson." The The color blooming in Agnes Crabtree's cheeks rivaled the vibrant hues of the geraniums in her obsessively ordered flowerbeds. Just because you reside on the periphery doesn't grant you immunity from community standards. This pumpkin patch is an offense to the eye, an open invitation to undesirable elements, and, without a doubt, a blight on property values. Billy's smile wavered ever so slightly. His pumpkins were his pride. The way their radiant orange blazed against the verdant field, the sheer joy they sparked in visiting children, the notion that someone, particularly Agnes Crabtree, would find them objectionable, it stung. "Now, hold your horses," he countered, striving for a calm tone. "Unsightly? These gourds are beacons of happiness. The kids adore them, and folks are already clamoring for them to grace their Halloween porches. Property values? I'd argue they elevate the neighborhood's charm, not diminish it." He swept his arm across the rows of pumpkins, soaking up the morning sun. "Just look at Mrs. Crabtree. Ain't they a glorious sight?" Agnes Crabtree remained resolute. Her arms were folded rigidly across her chest, her lips compressed into a thin line of disapproval. "Spare me the flattery, William. I recognize your ilk. Thinks himself above the established order, doing as he pleases with no regard for the collective." "That's hardly fair, Mrs. Crabtree," Billy retorted, his tone gaining an edge. "I'm simply trying to spread a little cheer. What's objectionable about that? Cheer achieved at the expense of neighborhood decorum? Unacceptable. I am giving you due warning, William Johnson. Discard this orange infestation forthwith, or I shall be compelled to lodge a formal complaint with the HOA. Billy exhaled heavily, a wave of frustration washing over him. Reasoning with Agnes Crabtree, he thought, was like trying to herd cats. Only the cats were armed with garden shears and a vehement dislike for anything out of place. "Report me? Be my guest, Mrs. Crabtree. Last I recall, the HOA wields about as much jurisdiction over my ranch as my aging coonhound, Blue. He barks a lot, but possesses precisely zero influence." He offered a quick wink, hoping to diffuse the tension with a touch of levity, but Agnes Crabtree remained impassive. "Don't claim you weren't forewarned," she spat, pivoting sharply and marching back towards her immaculate, code-compliant lawn. Her floral print dress rippled behind her, a vibrant banner of suburban discontent. Billy watched her depart, shaking his head in disbelief. Surely she couldn't be serious. The HOA? On his ranch? The idea was ludicrous. He returned to his task of adjusting the scarecrow, humming a light-hearted melody. Let her summon the HOA. He had more pressing concerns, like ensuring his prized Atlantic giant pumpkin received ample sunlight. He chuckled softly. Agnes Crabtree. A true original. He dismissed her threat as the idle ranting of a restless retiree with excessive time on her hands. He was wrong, of course. Dangerously wrong. Sirens and accusations. The rhythmic thwack of Billy's horseshoe against the metal stake was swallowed by a sudden, piercing wail. He nearly jumped out of his boots. A police car, lights flashing crimson and blue, was tearing down the quiet lane, gravel spitting from beneath its tires. It screeched to a halt right in front of his ranch. Billy's heart hammered against his ribs. He hadn't done anything wrong. Had he? He racked his brain, picturing his day. He'd fed the horses, mucked out the stalls, practiced his horseshoe toss, and... Nope, nothing illegal. The driver's side door swung open and a uniformed officer emerged, adjusting his belt. He had a stern face, weathered and unreadable. Billy swallowed hard, his mouth suddenly dry. Before the officer could speak, a shrill voice cut through the air. "That's him, officer. That's the one." Agnes Crabtree, arms waving like a malfunctioning windmill, marched towards them, her face a mask of righteous indignation. Her floral dress, usually a symbol of her fussy gentility, now seemed like battle camouflage. She jabbed a finger, a bony weapon, directly at Billy. "He's trespassing and violating HOA regulations. I told you, officer. This has been going on for weeks." Billy stared, dumbfounded. Trespassing? HOA regulations? He wanted to laugh, but the officer's serious expression kept the amusement bottled up. "Ma'am," the officer said, his voice calm but firm. "Let's take this one step at a time." "Sir," he turned his attention to Billy, his gaze assessing. "Can you explain what's going on here?" Billy found his voice a little shaky at first. "Officer, I own this property. This is Johnson Ranch. I live here." He gestured around him, taking in the familiar sight of his barn, the pasture, and the horses grazing peacefully in the distance. There's no trespassing. I have deeds and everything inside. Agnes snorted. Deeds? Don't try to fool him with your fancy papers. He's building without permits, letting his animals roam free and probably dumping toxic waste in the creek. He's a menace. Billy's confusion morphed into anger. That's a lie. I haven't done any of those things. And besides, I'm not even part of your stupid HOA. My property isn't included. The officer raised a hand, silencing them both. All right, let's keep it civil. Ma'am, what makes you think he's trespassing? Agnes puffed out her chest. He hasn't submitted his landscaping plans. His fence is too high. And those horses, they're an eyesore and they make a dreadful noise. It's a clear violation of Section 3, Subsection B, Paragraph 7 of the HOA bylaws. Billy could feel his face turning red. This was insane. He looked at the officer, pleading for reason. Officer, she's making this up. I've told her 100 times. I'm not in the HOA. She just doesn't like that I don't follow her rules. The officer sighed, a sound that suggested he was used to dealing with neighborhood disputes. Sir, can you produce some form of identification and proof of ownership? Billy nodded quickly. Yes, of course. It's inside. I'll get it. He hurried towards the house, feeling a knot of anxiety tighten in his stomach. He knew he was in the right, but Agnes Crabtree was clearly determined to make his life miserable. He hoped his ID and property deed would be enough to shut her down. As he walked, he glanced back at the officer and Agnes. She was pointing again, her mouth moving rapidly, undoubtedly painting him as the villain of the century. He quickened his pace, desperate to put an end to this ridiculous charade. What was he supposed to do to make her stop? And why, oh why, did his day off have to turn into this? A familiar face. The cruiser ground to a halt, scattering pebbles in its wake. Agnes Crabtree inflated her chest like a puffed-up robin, her moo-moo stirring in the gentle afternoon air. About time, she snapped, pointing a rigid finger at Billy. Someone reasonable at last. This hooligan has been a scourge on the neighborhood. Billy's earlier swagger deflated like a punctured tire. He'd stood his ground, hadn't he? Refused to cower before Agnes's preposterous claims. Still, the patrol car's arrival twisted his gut into knots. The driver's door opened and a tall figure extracted herself from the vehicle. Dark glasses rendered the officer's expression a mystery. Her immaculate navy uniform, the sun flashing off her badge, and her decisive movements spoke volumes of authority. Billy's throat constricted. This was it. A lecture, a citation, maybe even worse. All for standing up for his right to inhabit his own property. The officer adjusted her equipment belt, the leather sighing softly. Agnes, now riding a wave of newfound confidence, resumed her verbal assault. He's been tearing around the property, his animals run wild, and I wouldn't be surprised if he's been. She paused, grasping for the ultimate transgression. Illegally burning garden refuse. The officer's raised hand sliced through Agnes's rant. Ma'am, with all due respect, I need you to take a breath and let me get a handle on the situation. Her voice, even and controlled, possessed an odd familiarity. Turning to Billy, she finally removed her shades. And Billy could only gape. Mom? The word tumbled out, a stunned croak. Agnes sputtered, her face darkening to a shade of puce. Mom? This ruffian is your son. Officer Johnson, Mom, leveled a glare at Agnes that could curdle cream. That's Officer Johnson to you, Mrs. Crabtree. And yes, William is my son. Is there a problem we can address respectfully? Billy stared, utterly speechless. His mom? A cop? He knew she held some important municipal position downtown, but she always kept the details vague. He'd envisioned her buried under paperwork. Not this. This felt like a scene ripped from a sitcom. Relief surged, sweeping away the rising tide of anxiety. He was saved. Mom was here. Agnes Crabtree hadn't a prayer. A grin blossomed across his face. But beneath the elation, curiosity simmered. Why the secrecy? Was she ashamed of her work? Afraid he wouldn't understand? He'd always seen her as, well, Mom, the baker of cookies, the homework helper, the nagger about his room. Not a guardian of order. His mom turned to him, a glimmer of amusement dancing in her eyes. William, why don't you enlighten me as to what's been happening here? And leave out the theatrical flourishes, please. He straightened, feeling a swell of sudden pride. Well, Mom, Officer Johnson, it all started when Mrs. Crabtree decided that my chickens were an offense to good taste. He launched into a slightly embellished account of the morning's skirmish, complete with vocal impressions of Agnes's shrieks and his own valiant defense of his territorial rights. He caught the briefest flicker of a smile on his mom's lips as he recounted Agnes's increasingly absurd accusations. Agnes, meanwhile, sputtered and flapped her hands, desperate to interject. "He's fabricating everything. It's a complete falsehood. I demand." Officer Johnson's upheld hand silenced Agnes once more, a single, penetrating look doing the work of words. Then she addressed Billy again, her tone turning serious. "William, I appreciate your enthusiasm. But remember, we treat everyone with courtesy even when they are challenging to deal with." And, she added, her voice dropping, "no more impromptu tractor rallies, understood?" Billy's cheeks warmed. So word had gotten out about that. He nodded mutely. "Understood, Mom." The word echoed, a sharp reminder of their intertwined roles. He was her son, but she was also a peace officer upholding the law. He wondered how she would navigate this tightrope. He glanced at Agnes, who regarded them both with a potent cocktail of disbelief and indignation. This promised to be interesting. The truth unveiled. Agnes Crabtree inflated her chest, her floral print dress groaning under the strain. "Officer?" she cooed, a honeyed tone failing to disguise the sharp vinegar beneath. "Thank heavens you're here. This young man?" She waved a dismissive hand at Billy, practically vibrating with righteous fury. "Has been nothing but a source of aggravation, ignoring sensible HOA guidelines, jeopardizing the neighborhood's visual appeal with his menagerie, and now blatant insubordination. I even suspect he vandalized the sprinkler system. I only came to assess the situation, and he became utterly impossible." Officer Johnson, arms crossed, listened with stoic patience, sunglasses rendering her expression an enigma. She allowed Crabtree to exhaust her diatribe before responding, her voice a calm, grounded contrast to the other woman's escalating pitch. "Mrs. Crabtree," Officer Johnson stated evenly, "I understand your concerns. However, I need some clarification. Regarding these HOA regulations, could you present your official credentials, please? Something verifying your authority to enforce them." Crabtree's self-satisfied smirk wavered. Her eyes flickered, a hand rising to nervously touch her throat. "Well, officer," she stammered, "I don't have them on my person, per se. They're at my residence. But I am the, acting facilitator." Billy scoffed, earning him a venomous glance from Crabtree. "Facilitator for what? The garden gnomes? Last I checked, Mrs. Davison still runs the HOA, and she certainly didn't deputize you for anything." Officer Johnson raised a palm, silencing Billy with a look. "Mrs. Crabtree, are you a member of the HOA board?" A flush crept up Crabtree's neck, mottling her complexion. "In spirit, absolutely. I dedicate so much of my time. Mrs. Davison knows she can always rely on me. Officially, perhaps not, but my actions speak for themselves." She gestured vaguely at the sea of emerald lawns stretching down the street. "Someone has to uphold standards." Officer Johnson remained impassive. "So, just to be clear, you are not a currently elected or appointed officer within the Homeowners Association with the jurisdictional power to enforce regulations or issue fines?" Crabtree sputtered, desperate for an out. "That's a technicality. I'm just trying to preserve our neighborhood's character. That boy is undoing all our hard work." Officer Johnson closed the distance between them, her tone shedding its earlier gentleness. "Mrs. Crabtree, obstructing access to private property and leveling false accusations to law enforcement are both serious matters, especially when driven by personal animosity. Do you understand?" The air thrummed with unspoken conflict. A robin, perched atop a picket fence, bolted skyward. Crabtree's posture deflated, her energy dissipating as quickly as it had surged. "I just wanted to contribute," she mumbled, the words hollow and unconvincing. "Contribute," Billy derided. "By trespassing and badgering me?" Officer Johnson silenced Billy with a pointed look. Then, turning back to Crabtree, she spoke with resolute calm. "Mrs. Crabtree, I need you to vacate Mr. Johnson's property immediately. Furthermore, I strongly advise you to refrain from any further contact with him unless it is conducted through appropriate HOA channels, and only if you are genuinely authorized to do so. Is that understood?" Crabtree nodded abjectly, eyes glued to the ground. "Yes, officer. Perfectly." She spun around and lumbered towards her gleaming white SUV, parked at an awkward angle across the roadway. As Crabtree wrestled with her car keys, Officer Johnson turned to Billy, a hint of amusement gracing her features. "Looks like you're free to get back to whatever you were doing." She inclined her head towards the ranch, her smile widening. "Just try to keep the commotion to a minimum, okay? I live a few streets over, and I'm trying to enjoy my day off." Billy grinned, a wave of relief flooding him. "You got it, officer. I appreciate you intervening." Officer Johnson winked. "Don't mention it. Just try not to give your neighbors any legitimate cause to call next time. All right?" With a final nod, she pivoted and headed back to her patrol car, leaving Billy standing in the sun-drenched driveway, the aroma of hay and liberation filling his senses. "HOA? Not here." Billy bounced on the balls of his feet, practically vibrating with pent-up energy. "Mom's gonna shut her down," he whispered, eyes wide. He'd abandoned the woodpile, his axe lying forgotten in the dirt. Agnes Crabtree's face was a shade of purple usually reserved for eggplants. "I demand you instruct your wife to cooperate immediately. This is a blatant obstruction of HOA authority." She jabbed a bony finger in Sarah's direction. "Are you aware of the unapproved alterations to your property? That the rustic aesthetic is simply not in keeping with the community guidelines." Sarah, leaning against the porch railing, crossed her arms. The setting sun glinted off her sunglasses, momentarily obscuring her expression. When she spoke, her voice was calm, a stark contrast to Agnes's shrill pronouncements. "Mrs. Crabtree, I understand your concern. However, our property is not and has never been part of the Harmony Glades Homeowners Association." Agnes spluttered, her mouth opening and closing like a landed fish. But, the paperwork. The covenants." Sarah chuckled, a low, melodious sound. "The covenants you're referring to pertain to properties within the Harmony Glades subdivision. This ranch predates that subdivision by nearly a century. It's outside the designated area and therefore not subject to your HOA's rules." She pushed off the railing, her posture straightening. "Now, if you'll excuse us, we have supper to get to." Billy's eyes sparkled. He pumped a fist in the air, muttering, "Yes. Take that, Crabtree." Agnes's composure crumbled. The carefully constructed facade of authority evaporated, leaving behind a raw, angry woman. "You're using your position to circumvent regulations. It's an abuse of power." She pointed a trembling finger at Sarah's badge, barely visible beneath her unbuttoned jacket. "I'm reporting this. I'm reporting you." Sarah sighed, removing her sunglasses. Her gaze was direct, unwavering. "Mrs. Crabtree, you are welcome to report whatever you feel is necessary. However, I would caution you against misusing emergency services. Filing a false report is a serious offense." A bead of sweat trickled down Agnes's temple. Her gaze darted around as if searching for an escape route. "This isn't over," she hissed, her voice losing some of its earlier bravado. "I'll find something. You haven't heard the last of this." She turned abruptly and stomped back towards her golf cart, her shoulders rigid with indignation. The little electric motor whirred as she executed a jerky three-point turn, nearly clipping the mailbox. With a final glare in their direction, she sped off down the long driveway, a cloud of dust swirling in her wake. Billy whooped with delight, jumping up and down. "She's gone. She's really gone. You showed her, Mom." He ran to Sarah and wrapped his arms around her legs. Sarah ruffled his hair, a small smile playing on her lips. "It wasn't about showing her, Billy. It was about explaining the facts." She paused, her gaze softening. "Besides, sometimes people just need a little help understanding things." The sun had dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. The air cooled, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. "Supper time?" Billy asked, his stomach rumbling audibly. Sarah nodded. "Supper time. But first," she said, her eyes twinkling, "help me put your axe away, young man. Chores first, then victory dinner." Billy groaned good-naturedly but followed his mother towards the woodpile, his earlier excitement momentarily tempered by the prospect of unfinished work. The ranch, bathed in the fading light, felt peaceful and secure. The HOA, it seemed, was a problem for another day and another place. Pumpkin party. The slam of Mrs. Crabtree's front door echoed through the suddenly silent cul-de-sac. Billy puffed out his chest, a little bit proud, a little bit scared. His mom squeezed his shoulder. "Well," she said, her voice carrying easily. "That was something." A murmur of agreement rippled through the small crowd that had gathered. Old Mr. Henderson, who lived across the street, shuffled forward, leaning heavily on his cane. "Good for you, Sarah," he rasped, nodding his head. "About time someone stood up to that woman." Mrs. Peterson, known for her prize-winning roses, patted Sarah's arm. Don't you worry, dear. She does this to everyone. Thinks she owns the place. Billy, emboldened by the support, piped up. She said our pumpkins were. He struggled to remember the exact insult. Unacceptable. A few chuckles rippled through the neighbors. Even Sarah smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached her eyes. Well, Billy, I think our pumpkins are just fine. In fact, she paused, glancing around at the small gathering. I think they're cause for a celebration. She winked at Billy, a secret signal passing between them. How about a pumpkin carving contest? A cheer went up. Mr. Henderson, despite his age, managed a whoop. Mrs. Peterson clapped her hands. A few other neighbors, drawn by the commotion, wandered over to join the impromptu party. I've got some extra carving tools in the garage, Mr. Henderson offered. And Martha always makes a mean apple cider. I'll see if she's up to brewing a batch. We can bring some hot dogs and marshmallows for roasting. Mrs. Peterson chimed in. Billy's eyes widened. This was turning out even better than he'd hoped. He tugged on his mom's sleeve. Can we, Mom? Can we really have a contest? Sarah ruffled his hair. Of course, we can. It wouldn't be much of a contest without the champion pumpkin carver. Would it? She smiled, her eyes twinkling. Billy grinned, already envisioning his masterpiece. He was going to carve the scariest, funniest, most amazing pumpkin the cul-de-sac had ever seen. He pictured Mrs. Crabtree peeking through her blinds, green with envy, as everyone admired his work. The air crackled with an unexpected sense of community. Neighbors who usually just waved in passing were now chatting, sharing ideas and making plans. The golden light of the setting sun cast long shadows across the lawns, painting the scene in warm, inviting hues. The scent of wood smoke from a distant fireplace mingled with the crisp, autumnal air, creating a perfect backdrop for their impromptu celebration. Mrs. Crabtree's house remained silent, a dark and brooding presence at the edge of the gathering. The curtains were drawn, effectively blocking out the laughter and camaraderie that now filled the cul-de-sac. As Billy bounced on his toes, eager to get started, Officer Johnson addressed the crowd. All right, everyone, let's gather around. I'll go grab some tables and we can get this party started. The only rule? Best pumpkin wins. The crowd cheered once more, a chorus of voices that drowned out the last lingering echoes of Mrs. Crabtree's rage. The pumpkin party was on. A ranch united. Billy, practically vibrating with excitement, marched a small parade of pumpkins across the still damp grass of the ranch. He'd arranged them meticulously, the goofy-toothed grin of Captain Pumpkin, the surprised face of Ollie, and finally the menacing snarl of Fong, his masterpiece. Look what I made, he yelled, presenting his gaudy creations to Mrs. Henderson, who was cautiously approaching from her manicured lawn. Mrs. Henderson, clutching her miniature poodle, Pierre, eyed the pumpkins with suspicion. Very festive, Billy, she said, the word festive sounding like she just swallowed a lemon. Pierre, sensing her unease, yapped nervously at Fong. Fong's my favorite, Billy declared, puffing out his chest. He's gonna win the contest for sure. Sarah, emerging from the house, suppressed a smile. Now, Billy, remember what we talked about? It's about having fun, not just winning. She gave Mrs. Henderson a warm nod. Morning, Margaret. Glad you could make it. Wouldn't miss it, Mrs. Henderson replied stiffly, adjusting her perfectly coiffed hair. Pierre continued his tirade against Fong. Soon, other ranch residents began to arrive, drawn by the aroma of spiced cider and the promise of friendly competition. Tables laden with carving tools, stencils, and, of course, more pumpkins were set up on the Johnsons' sprawling lawn. Even Mr. Abernathy, notorious for his complaints about everything from the color of Sarah's mailbox to the height of their grass, showed up, albeit with a skeptical frown and a pumpkin that looked like it had already lost the will to live. The air buzzed with laughter, the scrape of tools against pumpkin flesh, and the chatter of neighbors. Billy, initially fixated on showcasing his pumpkins, quickly got caught up in the communal spirit. He helped a younger child struggling to scoop out pumpkin guts, offered stencils to a couple who looked utterly bewildered, and even complimented Mrs. Henderson's surprisingly delicate floral carving. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the ranch, the carved pumpkins were lined up for judging. The variety was astounding. Whimsical characters, spooky monsters, and even surprisingly intricate landscapes. Sarah, acting as the official judge, carefully examined each entry, offering encouraging words and constructive feedback. And the winner is... Sarah paused for dramatic effect, glancing at Billy, who was bouncing on the balls of his feet. All of you. Everyone did such a fantastic job. It's impossible to pick just one. A chorus of cheers erupted. Billy, momentarily deflated by the lack of a single winner, quickly recovered and beamed. Yeah, we all won. As the evening drew to a close and people began to pack up, Mr. Abernathy approached Sarah. I must admit, he said, his voice surprisingly subdued, this was enjoyable. Thank you. He even managed a small, almost imperceptible smile. Later, as Billy helped Sarah clear the tables, he was unusually quiet. Sarah knelt beside him, brushing a stray strand of hair from his forehead. What's on your mind, buddy? Mrs. Henderson said my pumpkins were festive, like she didn't even like them, Billy confessed, kicking at a stray pumpkin seed. And Mr. Abernathy always complains about everything. Why can't they just be nice? Sarah sighed. Some people, Billy, have a harder time letting go of their worries and opening up to others. Maybe they've had bad experiences. Maybe they're just different. She paused, choosing her words carefully. The important thing is that you were kind and welcoming. You showed them that this ranch, this community, is a place where people care about each other. And sometimes that's enough to make a difference. Billy considered this for a moment. So, even if they're grumpy, we should still be nice? Exactly, Sarah said, ruffling his hair. Being a good neighbor isn't about whether other people are nice to you. It's about being the kind of person you want to be and helping create the kind of community you want to live in. He looked out at the ranch, now softly illuminated by the flickering candlelight of the carved pumpkins. Even Mrs. Henderson's house, usually dark and forbidding, seemed to glow with a faint, pumpkin-tinged warmth. Maybe, just maybe, Sarah was right. Maybe even the grumpiest neighbors could be won over with a little kindness, a little pumpkin carving, and a whole lot of community spirit.